Fair warning, this video is going to be a little bit complicated because it deals with a complicated subject. Now, many of you are aware that Venezuela has introduced their new currency, the digital Bolivar. Now, digital, it's kind of a misleading name in my opinion because it's not a digital currency kind of thing. I think it may just be in the way that it's translated. Basically, they've come out with a new currency that's knocked like 6 zeros off of their amounts because the hyperinflation that was going on. Now, this is replacing what was about 3 years ago the sovereign Bolivar, which was another redo of the currency, which was not really all that successful. And we're hoping that this new digital Bolivar will be much more successful. Now, like I said, Venezuela is going through a period of hyperinflation, which has certainly been exacerbated by the last 3 years, mainly due to a drop in economic activity. This is not the Ron Paul 1776 version where you print money and then therefore inflation. The amount of money in the system has to match the amount of economic activity that exists, which is why central banks regulate the amount of currency that there is. And because there was a 65% loss in economic activity over the past 3 years, particularly, most of it, there's now too much money because there's less economic activity. They didn't print too much money. There was enough money at the time. But now that the economy has contracted by more than half, now there's too much of it. Now, the Venezuelan central bank assured the public that the digital Bolivar will not affect the value of the current currency. So people who still have the sovereign Bolivar, don't worry, it's not going to suddenly collapse and then not be worth as much. You can still use it until those bills eventually go out of circulation. Now, the country's financial regulator emphasized that there was a need to accelerate towards a digital economy by modernizing payment systems, meaning rely less on cash and more on electronic transfers. Things like debit, things like going into your bank and making a wire transfer, etc. You know, some of the things in a lot of these countries, you know, debit isn't a thing where it is like we have here, and like many, you know, advanced first world countries. That streamlines the process. It also avoids the use of paper money, which is not as flexible as a purely digital currency would. That's not to say you don't need paper money. They're saying that in terms of people hoarding money and stuff like that, it would make it easier to use it because you wouldn't have to have as much physical money in the system. So it's not like it's this big thing. They're just trying to streamline the process, make it easier. And that's why they're trying to modernize the payment system. Now, this reconversion is taking place only 3 years after the introduction of the sovereign Bolivar in 2018. The central bank had removed 5 zeros from the previous strong Bolivar. This was a part of a series of reforms known as the Economic Recovery, Growth and Prosperity Plan. It had success for a short time, but the devaluation/inflation continued. The Maduro government managed to slow the problem by introducing increasingly liberal economic measures, which included lifting of foreign exchange controls. Now, during this time was obviously very complicated. There was a lot of inflation, and the central bank had to come out twice with new bills, some as bills for like literal physical money into circulation that were as high as 1 million bolivars, because that's what the hyperinflation is. And that's currently the highest domination of the old currency that exists in the system right now. Like I said, the main problem is that there's been a significant contraction of the economy and economic activity. And, you know, as I said, you need a particular amount of money. You need your money supply to be flexible enough to match with the pace of economic activity inside your country. This is one of the reasons why the gold standard was gotten rid of, despite how many, centuries or whatnot that it was being used. Because gold is not as flexible as fiat currency, as we learned with the Great Depression, specifically in the United States with regards to the Great Depression. Now, it's not just the contraction of the economy. COVID has hit the country immensely hard, and it's about 7 years of recession that also includes crushing U.S. sanctions that are not only illegal, they're morally repugnant for what they're doing to the Venezuelan people. The GDP shrinking 65% between 2013 and 2019. Maduro has a plan which isn't too popular. He's planning to get the economy back on track by offering even more favorable conditions for private investment, including tax breaks and weakened labor protections. Now, these very specifically anti-socialist moves have a lot of the Chavistas upset, intellectuals, labor organizers, many youth, etc., upset because, they signed on to do the Bolivarian revolution, not to give liberal economic reforms to capitalists. Kind of the whole point of socialism is to reject capitalism and to build a new system that's not based on profit, but based on fulfilling need and economic planning that socialism is supposed to be. So this does certainly signal a significant retreat. If you are giving reforms to capitalists, which you're not supposed to be doing if you're socialist, this does indicate that Venezuela is moving in the other direction. Now, some people will argue that you would definitely need these reforms, given the way the economy is performing right now. You see, the problem with that is they're still allowing the free market to function. The point of socialism is to get rid of the anarchy of production. That's the point. That's why Marx wrote extensively of why the market is not socialist and something that should be done away with. But the problem is that these 21st century socialist-minded people have their own view of what it is that socialism is. And to be perfectly honest, these 21st century socialism people essentially believe that socialism is when the state spends money on people. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with actually getting rid of capitalism, getting rid of market mechanisms. It's only when the state takes money and spends it on people. Or at least one person put it, when the government does what's right for its people, which is an incredibly vague term that could apply to anything, like the stimulus bill being proposed by the Democratic Party in the United States right now. It's being held up by two particular members of the Democratic Party. Technically, it's the exact same thing. It's literally just taking state money in a market system and putting it out for people. Now, you could nitpick certain things in there, and of course you could, but essentially that's it. That's the problem with a lot of the American Marxists, is they see social democracy as being socialism, even ones that proclaim to be Marxist. What Maduro should be doing in this situation is rejecting the market and begin planning the economy. If the Soviets can carry out an entire industrialization when their only method of economic calculation was pencil and paper, then you can do it with the computers that we have today. I mean, that's something that was even being done in Allende's Chile, or was in the embryo stages of using, socialist cybernetics, using computers to calculate economy, etc. That's the mistake the Bolivarian Revolution keeps making. And yes, it's not above criticism. It keeps doing this things to subsidize people to be able to afford the market price. Well, if the market price is the problem, maybe you should be doing something about the market. Like, you could put in price controls if you wanted to be a bourgeois government, or you could get rid of the market if you were doing socialism. See, the problem is they're creating, the 21st century socialist type people are talking about some kind of vague line that can't actually be defined between social democracy and their kind of socialism. For them, it's just a matter of how much or what it is that you spend state money on, not abolishing capitalism like it's supposed to be. And that's really the problem where we are right now. Maduro isn't going all the way and just get rid of the capitalist class. I mean, why not? They already allow the opposition parties, which are backed by the United States, to exist to begin with. I don't know why you're doing that. Their whole point is to completely turn the country over to the United States. I don't even know why you would let that act of treason even exist. They're literally whole parties of just friggin' treason. Just get rid of them. I mean, how many times have we seen, the Venezuelan government go in, take a company that's on a boss's strike where the boss refuses, I can't make a profit, I have to shut down, and then locks out the workers. And then the workers come in and say, well, we want to do it anyway, and the government takes the company away from the capitalists, gives it to the workers as a co-op, and then they go in to function again. That's the right way to go. And that's what they've been doing. The problem is you're always going to be limited by the market. Socialism is not when you have a workers' co-op inside of capitalism. Because guess what? It's still subject to the anarchy of the market. That seems to be the one real thing that the 21st century socialists and the dingists just can't seem to wrap their head around. The market is not socialism. There's a reason why Marx wrote against it and created this whole theory as to why the market should not be used. But then they just dismiss it and say, it's different now. I mean, why do you think these countries keep getting smashed like this? Every time that they try to pull something that is 21st century socialism, they turn around and get screwed, and they still go with the market mechanisms, etc., that make capitalism what it is, and then leaves the capitalists to continue to exist. And then in the case of at least Bolivia and Venezuela, those capitalists end up sabotaging the economy. Well, I mean, it'd be really great if you stop them from doing that. If they're going to sit there, sabotage it, get rid of them. Seize their means of production, give it to the workers. I mean, if you're not going to actually go full economic planning, at least seize it from them and give it to the workers. Still be subject to the market, but it's better than what's being done. And there's all kinds of ways of manipulating currencies, betting on it, taking it offshore, things for trading it back and forth that make more money than it's actually worth, which contribute to inflation. That's another story that's very long and very complicated to carry out. And that's particularly with regards to Venezuela. It's hard to have that kind of control over currency. Unless, of course, it's digital, then it becomes easier to do. Or it becomes, in this case, more digital. So I'm just saying that there's this capitalist deviation in a lot of socialist thinking that's leading to the problems that these countries are having today. And it's not like with China, where you just have such a massive, overwhelmingly powerful market that foreign companies can't really do anything significant to it. Their market isn't as vulnerable as smaller, less economically developed, less straight up, that aren't the behemoths that China is. And the way that I would solve it, and I think a lot of Marxists in history would solve it, would be getting rid of the market. But that's just my opinion with regards to socialist history and experimentation. So having said that, I want the Bolivarian experiment to continue. I want it to win. I want there to be socialism in Venezuela. They can do it. And it's frustrating to see these capitulations, liberal reforms, like getting rid of, what is it? Getting rid of labor protections. So if that's not anti-socialist, what is? If it's supposed to be a worker state. So I'm just saying, I hope the best for Venezuela. I want them to go socialist. And I got to agree with the Communist Party of Venezuela right now that the current Bolivarian experiment isn't really going along those lines anymore. And I'm hoping that it will in the future. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.